Well, hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. But the neat thing about it is we don't usually deal with inclusion or diversity. We deal with everything but that because people come on this podcast to tell their own stories. And that's what we get to do today with Jan Southern. Not necessarily anything profound about inclusion or diversity, but certainly the unexpected. And I'm sure we're going to figure out how that happens and what's unexpected about whatever. I got to tell you, before we started, we were just sitting here telling a few puns back and forth. Oh, well, we could always do that, Jan. Well, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Any puns before we start?
No, I think we've had enough of those.
You think we did it in, huh?
Yes.
Well, cool. Well, I want to thank you for being here. Jan has been very actively involved in a lot of things dealing with business and helping people and companies of all sizes. Companies of all sizes. I don't know about people of all sizes, but companies of all sizes in terms of becoming more effective and being, well, I'll just use the term resilient, but we'll get into that. But right now, let's talk about the early Jan. Tell us about Jan growing up and all that sort of stuff. That's always
Well, I
fun to
grew,
start with.
yes, I grew up in Liberal, Kansas, which is a small town just north of the Oklahoma border and a little bit east of New Mexico, kind of down in that little Four Corners area. And I grew up in the time when we could leave our house in the morning on the weekends and come home just before dusk at night, and our parents didn't panic, so it was a good time growing up. I uh, i lived right across the street from the junior high and high school, so I had a hugely long walk to work. I mean,
To
to
school.
school. Yeah. And so was a cheerleader in high school and went to college then at Oklahoma State, and graduated from there. And here I am in the work world. I've been working since I was about 20 years old, and I'd hate to tell you how many years that's been.
You can if you want. I won't tell.
Nobody will know.
Good point. Well, I know it's been a long time. I read your bio, so I know, but that's okay. Well, so what did you major in college?
Psychology.
Ah, okay. And did you go
Yes,
beyond a
and
bachelor's degree or just bachelor's?
I did not. I got an
Hmm.
MRS degree and had two wonderful children, and grew up. They've grown up and to become very fine young men with kids of their own. So I have four grandchildren and one great grandchild. So
Wowie zowie. Well,
yeah,
that's pretty cool. So when you left college after graduating, what did you do?
I first went to work in a bank. My ex-husband was in pharmacy school at Oklahoma State, at University of Oklahoma. And so I went to work in a bank. I was the working wife while he went to pharmacy school, and went to work in a bank. And years later, became a bank consultant. So we lived in Norman, Oklahoma, until he was out of school, and as I began having children during our marriage, I went to work for a pediatrician, which was very convenient when you're trying to take care of kids when they're young.
Yeah. And
So
what did you do for a pediatrician?
I was I was her receptionist and typed medical charts. So I learned a lot about medicine. Was very She was head of pediatrics at a local hospital, and also taught at the university. And so I got a great education in health and well-being of kids. It was a great job.
My sister-in-law um, had her first child while still in high school and ended up having to go to work. She went to work for Kaiser Permanente as a medical transcriber, but she really worked her way up. She went to college, got a nursing degree, and so on, and she became a nurse. And eventually, when she well, she didn't retire, but her last job on the medical side was she managed 7 wards and also had been very involved in the critical care unit, was a nurse in the CCU for a number of years. Then she was tasked, she went to the profit making side of Kaiser, as it were, and she was tasked with bringing paperless charts into Kaiser. She was the nurse involved in the team that did that. So she
Great.
came a long way from being a medical transcriber.
Well, she came a long way from being a single mom in high school. That's a great story of success.
Well, and she wasn't totally a single mom. She and the guy did marry, but eventually they did divorce because he wasn't as committed as he should be to one person, if it were.
That's a
And,
familiar story.
and he also drank and eventually died of cirrhosis of the liver.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, that's always sad, but it's
Mm,
but she coped and her kids coped, so it works out okay.
that's
But
great.
you went to work for a pediatrician, and then what did you do?
Well, after my husband, after he graduated, was transferred to Dallas, and I went to work for a company, Gardner Denver Company at the time. They've been since purchased by another company, and was because of my experience in banking prior to the pediatrician, I went to work in their corporate cash management division. And I really enjoyed that. I was in their corporate cash management for their worldwide division and was there for about 4 years and really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
One of my most exciting things was they were moving their headquarters from Quincy, Illinois, down to Dallas. And so I had been hired, but since they were not yet in Dallas, I worked with a gentleman who was in charge of putting together their corporate offices. And so we made all the arrangements as far as um, we had got a 10,000 square foot blank space when we started, and our job was to get every desk, every chair, every pen and pencil. And so when somebody moved from Quincy, Illinois, they moved in and they had their desk all set up. Their cubicles were ready to go, and they could hit the ground running day one. So that
So you clearly really got into dealing with organization. I would say then, wouldn't didn't you?
yes, yes, that was my probably my first exposure to the corporate world and learning exactly how things could be more efficient, more cost effective, and I really enjoyed working for that company.
Mm. I remember after September 11th, we worked to provide the technology that we were selling, but we provided technology to Wall Street firms so that they could recover their data and get set up again to be able to open the stock exchange and all the trading floors on the 17th of September, so the next Monday. And it was
Hmm.
amazing. One of the companies was, I think it was Morgan Stanley, and they had to go find new office space because their office space in the World Trade Center was, needless to say, gone. They found a building in Jersey City that had a floor, they said, about the size of a football field. And from Friday night to Sunday afternoon, they said it took about 36 hours. They brought in computers, including IBM taking computers from some of their own people and just bringing them into to Morgan Stanley and other things, including some of the technology that we provided. And within 36 hours, they had completely reconstructed a trading floor.
That's amazing.
It was absolutely amazing to see that. And for everyone, it was pretty crazy. But Wall Street opened on the 17th and continued to survive.
That's a great story.
So, what did you do? So you did this work with the 10,000 square foot space and other things like that, and then what?
Well, once everyone moved into the space in Dallas, then I began my work in their in their corporate cash management area. And from there, my next job was working in a bank when my husband then was transferred back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I went back to work in banking. And from that bank, I was there about 3 to 4 years, and I was hired then by John Floyd as a consultant for banks and credit unions, and I was with that company for 42 years.
My gosh.
I know that's unusual these days, but I really enjoyed what I did. We did re-engineering work and cost effectiveness in banks and credit unions for those 42 years. And so that was where I really cut my teeth on process improvement and continuous improvement. And still in that industry, but their company was bought by an equity firm. And of course, when that happens, they like to make changes and bring in their own folks. So those of us who had been there since day one were no longer there.
When did that happen?
That was in 2022.
Mm.
So,
It's interesting that companies do that. They always want to bring in their own people, and at least from my perspective, it seems to me that they forget that they lose all the tribal knowledge that people who had been working there have that made the company successful.
absolutely. So, I guess they're still doing well, and they've done well for themselves afterwards. And, but, they do. They lose all the knowledge, they lose all of the continuity with the clients. And it's sad that they do that, but that's very, very common.
Yeah, I know I worked for a company that was bought by Xerox, and all the company wanted was our technology. All Xerox wanted was the technology, and they lost all of the knowledge that all the people with sales experience and other kinds of experiences brought because they terminated all of us when the company was fully in the Xerox realm of influence.
So you know what I went through.
Yeah. Well, what did you do after you left that company, after you left John Floyd?
I left John Floyd. I was under a non-compete. So I kind of knocked around for a couple of years. I was of age where I could have retired, but I wasn't ready to. So then I found Ferguson Alliance, and I'm now a business advisor for family-owned businesses. And so I've been with Ferguson just over a year and doing the same type of work that I did before. In addition to that, I have become a certified exit planning advisor so that I can do that type of work as well. So that's my story in a nutshell as far as employment.
What is Ferguson Alliance?
Ferguson Alliance, we are business advisors for family-owned businesses. And the perception is that a family-owned business is going to be a small business, but there are over 500,000 family-owned businesses in the United States. Our market is the middle market from maybe 50 employees up to 1,000, 20 million in revenues up to, the sky's the limit. And so we do a lot of work as far as whatever can help a family owned business become more prosperous and survive into future generations.
Yeah.
It's a sad statistic that most family owned businesses don't survive into the third generation.
Why is that?
I think because um, the first, the first generation works themselves, their fingers to the bone to get their business off the ground and make it successful. And their offspring often enjoy, if you will, the fruits of the labors of their parents. And so many of them, once they've gone to college, they don't have an interest in joining the firm. And so they go on and succeed on their own. And then their children, of course, follow the same course from their work, and so that's really, I think, the primary reason. And also, the founders of the businesses have a tendency to let that happen, I think. And so, our coaching programs try to avoid that and help them to bring in the second and third generations so that they can, they can carry on the legacy of their parents or the founders.
So, what do you do, and what kinds of initiatives do you take to extend the longevity of a family-owned business? Then,
Well, the first thing is that Rob, who's our founder of our family-owned business, does a lot of executive coaching and helps the people who are within the business, be it the founder or being it their second or third generations, and he'll help with coaching them as to how to get past the family dynamics. Everybody has their own business dynamics, and then you add on top of that the family dynamics, in addition to just the normal, everyday succession of a business. And so we help them to go through those types of challenges, if you will. They're not always a challenge, but sometimes if there are challenges, Rob's coaching will take them through that and help them to develop a succession plan that also includes a document that says that a governance plan as to how their family business will be governed in addition to just a simple succession plan. And my role in a lot of that is to make sure that their business is ready to prosper too. That their assessment of as far as whether they're profitable, whether they are their processes are in place, etc. But one of the primary things that we do is to help them make certain that if they don't want to survive into future generations, that we help them to prepare to either pass it along to a family member or pass it along to someone who's a non-family member.
right? So, I've heard you mention the three P's that are involved in extending longevity. Tell me about that. What are the three P's?
Well, the first P is your people. If you don't take care of your people, be they family members or non-family members, then you're not going to be very successful. So, making certain that you have a system in place, have a culture in place that takes care of your people, to us is very key. Once you make sure that your people are in a culture of continuous improvement and have good, solid foundation in that regard, you need to make sure that your processes are good. That's the second P. That you have to have your processes all documented, that you've authorized your people to make decisions, that they don't always have to go to somebody else. If you're a person in the company and you recognize that something's broken, then you need to have empowerment so that your people can make decisions, and not always have to get permission from someone else to make certain that those processes continuously are improved. That's how Toyota became so successful, is they installed a product. They called it, I say a product, they installed a culture. They called it Kaizen. And so Kaizen was simply just continuous improvement, where if you were doing a process and you ask yourself, why did I do it this way? Isn't there a better way? Then, you're empowered to find a better way and to make sure that you can make that decision as long as it fits in with the culture of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third P is product. You've got to have a product that people want. Um, I know that you've seen a lot of companies fail because they're pushing a product that nobody wants. And so you make certain that your products are good, your products are good, high quality, and that you can deliver them in the way that you promise. And so those are really the three P's. I'd like to go back to process and just kind of, one of the things, as you know, we had some horrendous flooding here in Texas
Mm-hmm.
recently. And one of the things that happened during that, and not that it was a cause of it, but just one of the things that exacerbated the situation, is someone called to say, please, we need help. There's flooding going on. It was one of their first responders had recognized that there was a tragic situation unfolding. And when he called in to their system to give alerts, someone says, well, I'm going to have to get approval from my supervisor.
Mm.
Well, the approval didn't come in time. So what's behind that, we don't know. But that's just a critical point as to why you should empower your people to make decisions when it's necessary.
I'm sure in its own way, there was some of that with all the big fires out here in California back in January. Although part of the problem with those is that aircraft couldn't fly for 36 hours because the winds were so heavy that there was just no way that the aircraft could fly. But you got to wonder along the way, since they are talking about the fact that the electric company, Southern California Edison, had a fair amount to do with probably a number of the fires igniting and so on. One can only wonder what might have happened if somebody had made different decisions to better prepare and do things like coating the wires so that if they touched, they wouldn't spark and so on, that they didn't do. And I don't know, but one can only
It's
wonder.
it's hard to know, and in our situation, would it have made any difference had that person been able to make a decision on her own?
Yeah.
I was moving so rapidly, it might not have made any difference at all. But you just have to wonder, like you said.
Yeah. There's no way to, at this point, really know and understand, but nevertheless, it is hopefully something that people learn about for the future. I heard that they're now starting to coat wires, and so hopefully that will prevent a lot of the sparking and so on. I'd always thought about they ought to have put everything underground, but coating wire, if they can do that and do it effectively, would probably work as well, and that's, I would think, a lot cheaper than trying to put the whole power grid underground.
I would think so. We did when I was with my prior company. We did a project where they were putting everything underground in Burlington, Vermont, and it was incredible what it takes to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, we on the outside just don't realize, there's a room that's like 10 by 6 underground that carries all of their equipment and things necessary to do that. And I never realized how costly and how difficult it was to bury everything. We just have the impression that, well, they just bury this stuff underground and that's all it takes. But it's a huge, huge undertaking in order to do that.
Well, and it's not just the equipment, it's all the wires, and that's of miles and thousands of miles of cable that has to be buried underground, and that gets to be a real challenge.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. So, another story about cables. We were working in West Texas one time on a project, and we're watching them stretch the wiring. They were doing some internet provisioning for West Texas, which was woefully short in that regard. And they were stringing the wire using helicopters. It was
Mm.
fascinating. And the only reason we saw that is it was along the roadways when we were traveling from West Texas back into San Antonio, where our flights were coming in and out of. So that was interesting to watch.
Yeah. Um, yeah, people get pretty creative. Well, thinking back a little bit, John Floyd must have been doing something right to keep you around for 42 years.
Yes, they did. They were a fabulous company and still going strong. I think he opened in 1981. It's called Advantage now. It's not John Floyd, but
Right.
Right. That was a family-owned business. That's where I got to cut my teeth on the dynamics of a family-owned business and how they should work and how and his niece is one of the people that's still with the company, whether now that they're owned by someone else, whether she'll be able to remain as they go into different elements is another question. But
Yeah.
yeah, they were great.
How many companies, going back to the things we were talking about earlier, how many companies when they buy out another company or they're bought out by another company, how many of those companies generally do succeed and continue to grow? Do you have any statistics, or do more tend not to than do? Or
I think that more tend to survive. They tend to survive though with a different culture, I guess you would say. They don't retain the culture that they had before. I don't have any firm statistics on that because we don't really deal with that much.
yeah,
But I don't. They tend to survive with the culture of the newer company if they fold them in.
yeah. Well, and the reality is, to be fair, evolution always takes place. So the John Floyd in, say, 2022 wasn't the same as the John Floyd Company in 1981.
Not at all. No, exactly. Not at all.
So it did evolve and it did grow. And so hopefully, when that company was absorbed elsewhere and with other companies, they do something to continue to be successful. And I think that's good. I know
Hmm.
that with Xerox, when it bought Kurzweil, who I worked for, they were also growing a lot and so on. The only thing is that their stock started to drop. I think that there were a number of things. They became less visionary, I think is probably the best way to put it. And they had more competition from other companies developing and providing copiers and other things like that. But they just became less visionary. And so the result was that they didn't grow as much as probably they should have.
I think that happens a lot. Sometimes, if you don't have a culture of continuous improvement and continuous innovation, which maybe they didn't, I'm not that familiar with
Yeah, I
how
don't
they
know.
move forward, um, then you get left behind, you
Yeah.
know. I'm in the process right now of becoming certified in artificial intelligence in my old age. And the point that's made, not by the company necessarily that I'm studying with, but by many others, is there's going to be two different kinds of companies in the future. There's going to be those who've adopted AI and those who used to be in business. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably fair, you
I think
know.
it. I think it is, and I also we talked with a person on this podcast about a year ago, or not quite a year ago, but he said AI will not replace anyone's jobs. People will replace people's jobs with AI, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't eliminate anyone from the workforce. And we ended up having this discussion about autonomous vehicles. And the example that he gave is right now we have companies that are shippers and they drive product across the country. And what will happen to the drivers when the driving process becomes autonomous and you have self-driving vehicles driving across country? And his point was what they should do, what people should consider doing, is not eliminating the drivers, but while the machine is doing the driving, find and give additional or other tasks to the drivers to do so that they can continue to be contributors and become more efficient and help the company become more efficient, because now you've got people to do other things than what they were used to doing, but there are other things that AI won't be able to do. And I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Exactly. Well, my nephew is a long haul truck driver. He owns a company, and nothing. The AI will never be able to observe everything that's going on around the trucking, and there's also the um, some of the things that that driver can do is those observations. Plus, they're going to need people who are going to program those trucks as they are making their way across the country. And So I'm totally in agreement with what your friend said, or your
Yeah.
guest had to say, that there's
Well,
going
and
to be
I
other things.
Yeah, and it isn't necessarily even relating to driving, but there are certainly other things that they could be doing to continue to be efficient and effective. And no matter how good the autonomous driving capabilities are, it only takes that one time when, for whatever reason, the intelligence can't do it, that it's good to have a driver available to help. And I do believe that we're going to see the time when autonomous vehicles will be able to do a great job, and they will be able to observe most of all that stuff that goes on around them. But there's going to be that one time, and that happens. I mean, even with drivers in a vehicle, there's that one time when maybe something happens and a driver can't continue. So what happens? Well, the vehicle crashes, or there's another person to take over. That's why we have at least two pilots in airplanes and so on. So
Right,
there are a lot of
exactly.
aspects of it.
I think so. I can remember when I was in grade school, they showed us a film as to what someone's vision of the country was, and part of that was autonomous driving, you
Hmm.
know. And so it was interesting that we're living in a time where we're beginning to see that.
Yeah, we're on the cusp, and it's going to come. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen. And we're going to find that vehicles will be able to drive themselves, but there's still much more to it than that. And we shouldn't be in too big of a hurry, although some so called profit making people may decide that's not true to their eventual chagrin. But we shouldn't be too quick to replace people with technology totally.
Exactly. We have cars in, I think it's Domino's Pizza. I'm not sure which pizza company, but they have autonomous
Yeah.
cars driving, and they're cooking the pizza in the back oven of the car while while it's driving to your location.
Yeah.
But there's somebody in the car who gets out of the car and brings the pizza to my door.
There has been some discussion about having drones fly the pizza to you. Well, we'll see.
Right. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one is really, pardon the pun, flown well yet, but we'll see. So, when you start a process improvement program, what are some of the first steps that you initiate to bring that about?
Well, the first thing that we do once we've gotten agreement with their leadership, then we have a meeting with the people who will be involved, who will be impacted, and we tell them all about what's happening, what's going to happen, and make certain that they're in full understanding. And, the first thing that you ever hear when you're saying that you're going to be doing a re-engineering or process improvement is they think, oh, you're just going to come in and tell me to reduce my staff, and that's the way I'm going to be more successful. We don't look at it that way at all. We look at it in that you need to be right, have your staff being the right size. And so in many cases in my past life, we've added staff. We've told them you're understaffed. But the first thing we do is hold that meeting, make certain that they're all in agreement with what's going to happen, explain to them how it's going to happen. And then the next step is that once management has decided who our counterparts will be within the company, who's going to be working with us to introduce us to their staff members, is we sit down with their staff members and we ask them questions. What do you do? How do you do it? Did someone bring it to you? Are you second in line or next in line for some task? And then once you finish with it, what happens to it? Do you give someone else? Is a report produced, etc.? And so once we've answered all of those questions, we do a mapping of the process. And once you map that process, Then you take it back to the people who actually perform the process and you ask them, did I get this right? I heard you say this. Is this a true depiction of what's happening? And so we make sure that they don't do 4 steps and they told us steps number 1 and 3. So that then once we've mapped that out, that gives us an idea of how can things be combined? Can they be combined? Should you be doing what you're doing here? Is there a more efficient or cost effective way of doing it? And we make our recommendations based on that for each process that we're reviewing. Sometimes there's 1 or 2 good processes in an area that we're looking at. Sometimes there are hundreds. And so that's the basic process. And then once they've said yes, that is correct, then we make our recommendations. We take it back to their management, and hopefully they will include the people who actually are performing the actions. And we make our recommendations to make changes. If it's correct, maybe they don't need to make any changes. Maybe everything is very, very perfect the way it is. But in most cases, they brought us in because it's not, and they've recognized it's not. So then once they've said, yes, we want to do this, then we help them to implement. We
Who
never do the
usually
work.
who
Go
usually
ahead.
starts this process? That is, who brings you in?
Generally, it is going to be, depending upon the size of the company, but in most cases, it's going to be the CEO.
Okay.
Sometimes it's the chief operating officer. Sometimes in a very large company, it may be a department manager, someone who has the authority to bring us in. But generally, I would say that probably 90% of our projects, it's at the C-level office.
So then, based on everything that you're discussing, probably that also means that there has to be some time taken to convince management below the CEO or COO or a department head. You've got to convince the rest of management that this is going to be a good thing and that you have their best interest at heart.
That is correct. And that's primarily the reason that we have for our initial meeting. We ask whoever is the contract signer to attend that meeting and be a part of the discussion to help to ward off any objections. And then to really bring these people along if they are objecting. And for that very reason, even though they may still be objecting, we involve them in the implementation. So an implementation of a recommendation has to include the validation. So we don't do the work, but we sit alongside the people who are doing the implementation and guide them through the process. And then it's really up to them to report back. Is it working as intended? If it's not, what needs to be changed? What might improve what we thought would be a good recommendation? And we work with them to make certain that everything works for them. And by the end of that, if they've been the tester, they've been the one who's approved steps along the way, we generally find that they're on board because they're now the owners of the process.
Mm.
And when they have ownership on something that they've implemented, it's amazing how much more resilient they think that the process becomes. And now it's their process and not ours.
Do you find most often that when you're working with a number of people in a company that most of them realize that there need to be some changes or something needs to be improved to make the whole company work better? Or do you find sometimes there's just great resistance and people say, no, there's just no way anything is bad here?
we find that 90% of the time, and I'm just pulling that percentage out of the air, I would say they know it needs to be changed. And the ones typically, not always, but typically, the ones where you find the greatest resistance are the ones who know it's broken, but they just don't want to change. You know, there are some people who don't want to change no matter what, or they feel threatened, that they feel like that a new and improved process might take their place, you know, might replace them. And that's typically not the case. It's typically not the case at all that they're not replaced by it. Their process is improved and they find that they can be much more productive. But the ones who are like, I call them the great resistors, usually don't survive the process. Either
Mm.
are, they generally let themselves go, if you will.
More ego than working for the company.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like my mom, you know, and they own the process as it was. We used to laugh and call this person Louise. You know, Louise has said, well, we've always done it that way.
Hmm.
You know, that's probably the best reason 20 years in not to continue to do it the same way.
Yeah. We talked earlier about John Floyd and evolution, and that makes perfect sense. What's
Exactly.
what's one of the most important things that you have to do to prepare to become involved in preparing for a process improvement project?
I think the most important thing, there's two very important things. One is to understand their culture, to know how their culture is today, so that you know kind of which direction you need to take them. If they're not in a continuous improvement environment, then you need to lead them in that direction. If they're already there and they just don't understand what needs to be done, there's two different scenarios. But the first thing you need to do is to understand the culture. The second thing that you need to do, other than the culture, is understand their their business. You need to know what they do. Of course, you can't know from the outside how they do it, but you need to know that, for instance, if it's we're working with a company that cleans oil tanks and removes toxins and foulants from the oil and gas industry. And so, if you don't understand at all what they do, it's hard to help them through the processes that they need to go through. And so, just learning in general what their technology, what their business is about. If you walk in there and haven't done that, you're just blowing smoke
Hmm.
in my mind. You know, I do a lot of research on the technologies that they use or their company in general. I look at their website. Look at their LinkedIn, their social media. And so, and then we request information from them in advance of doing a project so that we know what their org structure looks like. And I think those things are critical before you walk in the door to really understand their business in general.
Yeah, and that by doing that, you also tend to gain a lot of credibility because you come in and demonstrate that you do understand what they're doing, and people respond well to that, I would think.
They do. You know, one of our most interesting projects in my past was the electric company that I mentioned. There was an electric company in Burlington, Vermont that did their own electric generation. We'd never looked at anything like that. We're a bank consultants, you
Yeah.
know, and so we learned all about how they generated energy with wood chips and the the different things. And there were many days that I was out watching the wood chips fall out of a train and into their buckets where they then transferred them to a yard where they moved the stuff around all the time. So it's very interesting what you learn along the way. But I had done my homework and I knew kind of what they did and not how they did it in individual um, aspects of their own processes, but I understood their industry. And so it was, you do walk in with some credibility. Otherwise, they're looking at you like, well, what does this person know about
Yeah.
my job? You know?
And at the same time, have you ever been involved in a situation where you did learn about the company? You went in with some knowledge. You started working with the company, and you made a suggestion about changing a process or doing something that no one had thought of, and it just clicked, and everybody loved it when they thought about it.
Yes, yes, exactly. And probably that electric company was one of those such things. When they hired us, they told us, we said, we don't know anything about your business. And they said, good, we don't want you to come in with any preconceived ideas. And so some of the recommendations we made to them, it's kind of like an aha moment.
Yeah.
They look at you like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that. The same I would say in banking and in family businesses. They've never thought about doing things in a certain way.
Can you tell
And
us a story about one of those times?
yes, I would say that if you're talking about, let's talk about something in the banking industry where
Okay.
they are. I was working in a bank, and you you go in, and this was in the days before we had all of the ways to store things electronically. And so they were having a difficult time in keeping all of their documents and in place and knowing when to, put them in a destruction pile and when not to. And so I would say that they had an aha moment when I said, okay, let's do this. Let's get a bunch of the little colored dots. And you have big dots and small dots. And I said, everything that you put away for 1990, for instance, then you put on a purple dot. And then for January, you have 12 different colors of the little dots that you put in the middle of them. And you can use those things to determine that everything that has a purple dot and a little yellow dot in the middle of that one, that needs to be destructed. I think in that case it was 7 years. 7 years from now, you know that you need to pull that one off the shelf and put it into the pile to be destructed. And they said, we've never thought of anything. It was like I had told them that, the world was going to be struck to begin tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was so simple to me, but it was something that they had never ever thought of, and it solved. They had something like 5 warehouses of stuff, most of which needed to have been destroyed years before.
Yeah. But still, they weren't sure what. And so you gave them a mechanism to do that.
Right. Of course, that's all gone out the window today. You don't have to do all that manual stuff anymore. You're just, I'd say another example of that was people who were, when we began the system of digitizing the files, especially loan files in a bank. Um, this would hold true today as well, in that once you start on a project to digitize the files, there's a tendency to take the oldest files first and
Hmm.
digitize those. Well, when you do that, before you get to the end of it, if you have a large project, you don't need those files anymore.
Yeah.
So, our recommendation is start with your latest. Anything that needs to be archived, start with the newest. Because by the time that you finish your project, some of those old files you won't even need to digitize, just shred them.
Yeah.
It's just little simple things like that that can make all the difference.
When should a family business start documenting processes? I think I
The
know the
day they
answer, but
open their door.
that's what I thought you'd say.
Yes, yes, that is something that is near and dear to my heart, is that I would even recommend that you maybe do it before you open your doors if potential is there, so that the day you open your business, you need to start with your documenting your processes and you need to start on your succession planning. You know, those are the days that once you really start working, you're not going to have time. You know, you're going to be busy working every day. You're going to be busy servicing your customers, and that always gets pushed to the back when you start to document something.
Yeah.
And so that's the time. Do it when you first open your doors.
So when we talk about processes, um, maybe it's a fair question to ask, maybe not, but what are we really talking about when we talk about processes and documenting processes? What are the processes?
Well, the processes are the things that you do every day. Let's take as an example, just when you set up your files within your SharePoint or within your computer, if you don't use SharePoint, or your Google files, how you set those up. A process could also be during your accounting. What's the process that you go through to get an invoice approved? You know, when the invoice comes in from the vendor, what do you do with it? You know, who has to approve it? Are there dollar amounts that you have to have approvals for, or can some people just take in a smaller invoice and pay it without any approvals? We like to see there be a process where it's approved before you get the invoice from the customer, where it's been approved at the time of the order, and that way it can be processed more quickly on the backside to just make sure that it says what the purchase order, if you use purchase orders, or see what your agreement was. So it's the workflow. There's something that triggers an action, and then once that's triggered, then what takes place? What's next? Uh, what's the next steps? And you just go through each one of the things that has to happen for that invoice to get paid, and the check or wire transfer or whatever you use as a payment methodology for it to go out the door. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, what you do is you start, there's something that triggers it, and then there's a goal for the end, and then you fill in the center.
And it's a fascinating, I hate to use the word process to listen to all of this, but it makes perfect sense that you should be documenting right from the outset about everything that you do, because it also means that you're establishing a plan so that everyone knows exactly what the expectations are and exactly what it is that needs to be done every step of the way.
Right. And one of the primary reasons for that is we can't anticipate life. You know, maybe our favorite person, Louise, is the only one who's ever done, let's say, you know, payroll processing or something of that sort. And if something happens and Louise isn't able to come in tomorrow, who's going to do it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
without a map, a road map as to the steps that need to be taken, how's that going to take place? And so that's really the critical importance. And when you're writing those processes and procedures, you need to make them so that anybody can walk in off the street if necessary and do what Louise was doing and have it done properly.
Of course, as we know, Louise is just a big complainer anyway.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. You said
Hopefully
that.
not.
Yeah, I know. Well, once you've made recommendations and let's say they're put in place, then what do you do to continue supporting a business?
We check in with them periodically, whatever is appropriate for them and for the procedures that are there. We make sure that it's working for them, that they're being as prosperous as they want to be, and that our recommendations are working for them. Hopefully, they'll allow us to come back in, and most do, and make sure that what we recommended is right and is working for them. And if so, we make little tweaks with their approvals. And maybe new technology has come in. Maybe they've installed a new system. And so then we help them to incorporate our prior recommendations into whatever new they have. And so we try to support them on an ongoing basis if they're willing to do that, which we have many clients. I think Rob has clients he's been with for ever since he opened his doors 15 years ago. So
Of course, the other side of that is I would assume sometimes you work with companies, you've helped them deal with processes and so on, and then you come back in and you know about technology that they don't know. And I would assume then that you suggest that, and hopefully they see the value of listening to your wisdom.
absolutely, we find that a lot. We also, if they've discovered a technology on their own but need help with recommendations as far as implementation, we can help them through that as well.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I'm taking this class in AI to be able to help our customers move into a realm where it's much more easily implemented. If they already have the steps that we've put into place, you can feed that into an AI model and it can make adjustments to what they're doing or make suggestions.
Is there any kind of a rule of thumb to answer this question? How long does it take for a project to be completed?
It takes, in all fairness, regardless of the size of the company, I would say that they need to allow 6 weeks minimum. That's for a small company with a small project. It can take as long as a year or 2 years, depending upon the number of departments and the number of people that you have to talk to about their processes.
Hmm.
But to let's just take an example of a one single department in a company is looking at doing one of these processes. Then they need to allow at least 6 weeks to for discovery, for mapping, for their people to become accustomed to the new processes and to make sure that the implementation has been tested and is working and they're satisfied with everything that is taking place. 6 weeks is a very, very minimum. Probably 90 days is a more fair assessment as to how long they should allow for everything to take place.
Do you find that if you are successful with, say, a larger company, when you go in and work with one department and you're able to demonstrate success improvements or whatever it is that you define as being successful, that then other departments want to use your services as well?
Yes, yes, we do. That's a very good point. Is that once you've helped them to help themselves, if you will, once you've helped them through that process, then they recognize the value of that and will move on to another division or another department to do the same thing.
Word of mouth counts for a lot.
Doesn't it, though? I'd say 90% of our business at Ferguson and Company comes through referrals.
Hmm.
They refer either through a center of influence or a current client who's been very satisfied with the work that we've done for them, and they tell their friends and networking people that, here's somebody that you should use if you're considering this type of a project.
Well, if people want to reach out to you and maybe explore using your services and Ferguson services, how do they do that?
They can, if they want to contact me directly, it's Jan, Jan, at ferguson-alliance.com. And that's ferguson-alliance.com. And they can go to our website, which is the same, which is ferguson-alliance.com. One thing that's very, very good about our website is there's a page that's called resources, and there's a lot of free advice, if you will. There's a lot of materials there that are available to family-owned businesses specifically, but any business could probably benefit from that. And so those are free for you to be able to access and look at. And there are a lot of blog information, free ebook out there. And so that's the best way to reach Ferguson Alliance.
Well, cool. Well, I hope people will take all of this to heart. You certainly offered a lot of interesting and I would say very relevant ideas and thoughts about dealing with processes and the importance of having processes. For several years at a company, my wife was in charge of document control, and and not only doc control but also keeping things secure. Of course, having the sense of humor that I have, I pointed out nobody else around the company knew how to read Braille, so what they should really do is put all the documents in Braille, then they'd be protected. But nobody bought into that idea. I was very disappointed. Good idea, though.
Yes, that is a good idea. That'll keep them safe from everybody.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for listening today. We've been doing this an hour. How much fun!
It is fun.
Well, I appreciate it and love to hear from all of you about today's episode. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com or go to our podcast page, Michael Hingson, michaelhingson.com/podcast. But wherever you're listening, please give us a 5-star rating. We value your thoughts and your opinions, and I hope that you'll tell other people about the podcasts as well. This has been an interesting one, and we try to make them all kind of fun and interesting. So please tell others about it. And if anyone out there listening knows of anyone who ought to be a guest, Jan, including you, then please feel free to introduce us to anyone who you think ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, because I believe everyone has a story to tell, and I want to get as many people to have the opportunity to tell their stories as we can. So I hope that you'll all do that and give us reviews and stick with us. But Jan, again, I want to thank you for being here. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been a lot of fun, and I certainly thank you for inviting me.